I knew this was coming. There were warnings.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into CrushTheStreet.com. I'm Kenneth Ameduri, and I was just livid this morning as I was scrolling down Bernie Sanders' Facebook feed, and just the things that he posts to rile people up is absolutely ludicrous. And it's unfortunate because the things he says are things that everyone can agree on, but it's the solutions that he wants that are completely disagreeable if you are a serious economist and really look at the facts and figures on things. It's not bigger government that we need to combat the wage gap and the fact that minimum wage is not affording housing across the board. Here, I want to talk about a few things, and just scrolling down this feed made me want to do this. I want to talk about the crappy economy. I want to talk about the wall. I want to talk about the Electoral College, and I want to talk about clean energy under a Trump administration. And I'll just preface this by saying that I'm not a Republican. I'm certainly not a Democrat, but I lean libertarian, so I'm definitely connecting more on the Republican side. But as many of you know, there's faults and errors there too. But unfortunately, we live in a country where the Republicans and Democrats have completely monopolized the system, and things that should just be things that we discuss and say, hey, you know, this is an issue. You know, how do we best approach it? Unfortunately, it's politicized. For instance, the wall, which we'll talk about. You know, no, we all believe in walls, but it's now become a political issue. You either don't believe in a wall if you're a Democrat, or you do believe in a wall and you're a racist if you're a Republican. So let's talk about the crappy economy. Sanders posts these things. Housing affordability across the board. The minimum wage is not high enough now, working 40 hours a week, to afford a one-bedroom apartment in any state here in the U.S. Wow. Isn't that amazing? Is that the minimum wage cannot afford a one-bedroom apartment in the U.S. across the board? First of all, a couple things with this. Yes, a minimum wage was never intended to be your career and something that you should be able to feed your family on. And yes, it is something for people who are low skilled and want to work their way up, such as high school students, people that want to have a part-time job or something to get their feet wet. But unfortunately, we have rules and regulations that continue to shove money to other countries. And that's what we've seen. Just so you know, in the 1950s, someone working at a U.S. factory such as General Motors, someone that was working in the factory was averaging $50 an hour in today's terms. That wasn't a minimum wage. That wasn't a requirement to pay these people. They paid that because that was the market wage. And that makes total sense why someone that didn't have a degree, that was just a tradesman, was able to make that much money because it was $50 an hour. Only one person had to work. You were able to afford a car, a house, and not be in tremendous amounts of debt, making $50 an hour, working with your hands in the 1950s. But let's look at that a little closer. The U.S. was far more competitive than other countries around the world. Granted, Europe was decimated after World War II, and other countries were just not as advanced. So the GDP and the production and what we had here in the country was very far advanced and much more competitive than the rest of the world. People wanted to do business here. But what we've done since that time has degraded the fundamental infrastructure of our economy, and people are not making as much money as a result, and that really sucks. We've had wars that have put us into major amounts of debt. We've had Johnson's Great Society and tons of entitlement programs, all these things to help higher minimum wage requirements and all these things that, we're still talking about today, saying, hey, how come people don't make as much money? Well, we're not as competitive as we used to be. And we want things like NAFTA, free trade, and TPP when we don't have free trade here in the U.S. I think about the city I don't live too far from is Barstow. It's about an hour and a half away from where I live here in California near Los Angeles. It's a town on the way to Vegas, like a desert town. And the unemployment there is like 15-20%. It's ridiculous. And California has passed a $15 minimum wage law so what they've done is essentially made the cost of labor more expensive in an area that's already saying the cost of labor is too expensive. When something goes on the shelf and is not selling, you have to lower the price. And the labor in that city is not selling. And that's true of across the board. And we act like we can just tax more and redistribute the wealth more from producers, and think that they're not going to go elsewhere. And that's exactly what a guy like Bernie Sanders wants to do, saying, hey, it's their fault and we need to tax them more and redistribute the wealth and discourage productivity in this country and remove essentially the consequences of failure. I know we want people to have health care. We want people to have good wages. We want people to be able to afford a place to live. But your solution is to make our country less competitive and encourage the flow of capital to go elsewhere. And that is where I disagree with you, Mr. Sanders. And, he talks about the wealth, the income disparities here. This is the most important economic and moral story of our lifetime. The very rich get much richer. The middle class shrinks, and 43 million Americans live in poverty. We must stop the movement toward oligarchy and fight for the economy, which works for all of us, not just the 1%. And of course, we're not talking about all the money printing and the low interest rates, which have gone to the 1% since the '08 crisis. The response to the recession was, let's have low interest rates, let's print money. And guess what? Guess how the rich have gotten their money since the '08 crisis? Well, they own stocks and they own real estate. And what happened since the '08 crisis? Stocks have more than tripled and real estate has gone up back to bubble levels. In some areas, it's even past the '08 bubble crisis. And rich people own assets, so their net worths have gone straight to the roof. And guess what? Those types of gains are taxed at the long-term capital gains. I'm not against that. But yeah, they're going to be taxed at a lower rate when their assets that they've owned for more than a year go up. And the reason why, for everyone who wants to attack the rich for owning assets and getting a tax break, quote unquote, for that, is that the government incentivizes production and investment in the economy. And they want people to own things and hold on to them. It's productive for the economy. And that's why that there's a tax incentive for that. And it's not just for the rich. Anyone can go out and buy a stock and hold it for a year, or go out and buy a house and hold it for a year and sell it if it goes up at a lower tax rate. So anyways, just a couple things on that before I get into the next topic here. So the politicized issue of immigration and the wall. Look, no one is against immigrants, at least even on the Republican side right now. Trump has talked about how he wants to have an effective immigration policy. He wants to fix the fact that we have thousands of people crossing our border illegally, getting in front of the line from many other people who are going through the process legally. For God's sakes, the man has married Russian wives, immigrants, from this country. His wife, Melania, barely speaks English. I don't think he's against immigrants, but he wants it happening legally. And he understands that there's a problem and that we can't have floods of poor illegals coming over our border and ultimately getting on the system, because that's the problem that we have. We have the left that wants to just pander to people who haven't paid and earned their way in our system, who aren't American. And again, it's nothing against people from other countries. It's just you have to have rules if you're going to be a country. And in our system, we have a lot of handouts, and that's a problem. It's a magnet for many people who want to come here. Sure, there are other reasons. There's a better economic environment, and they can get a job here more easily and have a better life. All things that aren't bad on an individual level. And I don't blame people for wanting these things, but we have to control that. Imagine a bank that left its doors open at night and didn't lock the vault. Well, obviously that's an issue, because sure, we love people. We want people to have things. It'd be nice for them to have health care and money, but you can't do that because the bank won't serve its purpose and won't be effective anymore. And the country is the same way. You can't just have a country that's producing and then being overran by people who are largely not producing, and that the scales ultimately tip and the system implodes. And that should be understood, but we've politicized this issue of the wall. Is the wall even going to work? Of course it's going to work. We believe in walls. We have walls at the White House. We have walls at our house. Most people listening to this live in some sort of house with a lock on their door. It's not a racist thing, and it's not the only thing that should be done. We have an issue in the labor market where illegals are working here. And we have an issue with illegals getting driver's licenses. Of course, that was politically expedient for the left because they've painted themselves as the party for minorities and look how great we are, and then being able to go to colleges and receive grants and loans and all these different things that should be for Americans. But again, the left has been able to paint themselves as the party for minorities and buy many votes as a result of it. And as a result of that, we've had like 3 million. There was some reports going around the internet where 3 million illegals voted in our last election. And again, it just doesn't make sense. Like, if you were a company, you wouldn't have people voting and making decisions that don't have ownership in the company. But that's what they want. They want people that don't have an ownership in the country, are coming from a place that isn't as ideal, making decisions as to what is best for the future of this country and not just for them. And, you know, that is where people need to start waking up. And it's not against immigrants. Look, my wife has family that's from Mexico. She's half Mexican. I don't dislike Mexican people. My mom is from Argentina. I'm a Hispanic. She immigrated here. My mom speaks fluent Spanish. I speak Spanish. And it's not about hating people from the south of our border. I would advocate this for any country. Any country that has something worth protecting needs rules, because you can't have this system that attracts people and it doesn't have a rules to make sure that it's sustainable for the long term. But yeah, that's the problem. We got powerful Republicans who are pandering to people and powerful Democrats who don't necessarily have to have the interests of the country, the best interests of the country in mind, but the best interests for their own political gain. And that's what we are seeing here. We need to fix the sanctuary city problem, fix the magnet that is attracting people here and allowing them to take advantage of the system and move forward accordingly. And hey, Donald Trump's talking about that. He's addressing that problem. It's not a racist issue, but we've turned it into that. And Bernie Sanders is, again, scrolling through his feed today, was rather disturbing, and how he just panders and spouts out emotional things that rile up an uninformed population. We have 320 million people. We can't even start talking about the real issues because we have to dumb down our conversation for the masses to understand who are going to be voting in our election. And by the way, going back to the economic issue, we haven't even talked about the money printing that has benefited. Oh, you know what? We did. Sorry about that. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about, I think, is just absolutely hilarious, because everyone now is complaining about the Electoral College and that it's not representing the true will of the population, because Clinton received nearly 3 million more votes than Donald Trump. And even Bernie Sanders on his Facebook feed wrote, Donald Trump received 2.8 million fewer votes than Hillary Clinton, yet he will soon be inaugurated as president. Clearly, in a democratic process society, this should not be happening. We need change in the Electoral College. And this is funny. This is coming from a man who was not represented by the population when he was running in the Democratic primaries. And super PACs elected Hillary Clinton to be the nominee to run up against Donald Trump. And everyone who's complaining about this, sure, when you are the victim, you always feel the injustice. And I would venture to say that it is fair to assume that Republicans, if the shoe was on the other foot, would feel the same way, and they'd be out there complaining and crying and whining that they lost because of the Electoral College. But to be fair, they both ran to win the Electoral College. Donald Trump, if he was going for the popular vote, might have actually won the popular vote. It's a liberal fantasy just to assume that he would have lost if the rules were different. He would have went to California. He would have went to Texas. He would have went to New York and New Jersey and Seattle and all these areas where there's a lot more people to talk to. And guess what? There's a lot of disenfranchised people that would have voted for Donald Trump in those areas too. That maybe just because they knew that it was a worthless vote in California, for instance, maybe they didn't vote. So, it's unfair to assume that Donald Trump would have lost had it been a popular vote, because they both ran to win the Electoral College vote. Hillary Clinton spent many hours in the Rust Belt, campaigning in Michigan, campaigning in Ohio and Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and all these states that she needed to win. She spent a lot of time and a lot of money in this area and failed to win over the people. She failed to connect, and billionaire Donald Trump did. And he's fighting for people. People like the fact that, hey, he's bringing jobs back with Carrier, and that he rejected the $4 billion Boeing deal that they wanted to do with his airplane, the Air Force One. Look, it's unfortunate because I do feel bad, and this is where I connect with the left, and that is we have such a powerful federal government, and they're in charge of so many things: our morals, our ideals, who people should marry, what they're supposed to do with, what we're supposed to do with our guns. There's all these discussions about things that are on the table of what they're going to allow, what they're not going to allow, rather than it going down to the states and our local governments. Again, the founding fathers understood the problems of having such a powerful centralized government that they made it very clear that it should be in the hands of the states to a larger, and that was when the country had 30 million people. That's the size of a large U.S. city, pretty much. Very large U.S. city, but not a country, not even a state now. And they understood how the powers need to be at a local level. And it's unfortunate that the government is so powerful and that we are so affected by what someone else votes for. And that, we all pitch in and pay taxes and have to suffer the consequences of what someone else wants to impose on us, rather than having a truly limited federal government and, really enjoy the freedoms that are inherent to us. The government in its role protecting our freedoms, protecting our borders, and being involved in small aspects of our lives, roads and bridges, and maybe the court system, different things that we can discuss as to coming together collectively in the form of a government to have, but not to this extent that they are just so involved that it really does piss you off when the other side wins, and that your rights and freedoms are going to be taken away. But this whole idea of the Electoral College, it was done so presidential candidates don't just go to the big cities and pander to that population, and that the rest of the country that lives in smaller urban towns that are not very populated get totally ignored. And that was why it was done, and everyone had agreed to it, and the left agreed to it. And they've just been left and right trying to attack and find a reason as to why Clinton lost. First it was the emails, then it was the Electoral College, now it's Russian hacking, and they keep doing whatever they can to discredit Trump's victory in this. But he won. He's going to be the president unless someone shoots him. And you know what? Hopefully he can make some changes. I don't expect him to save this thing, but it'd be nice to kind of have a few steps in the better direction than, accelerating in the direction the Obama-Clinton agenda had for us. More communism, essentially, with healthcare and more rules, more regulations, more problems in the Middle East. And, actually, that's what I want to talk about next. All right, guys, let's talk about energy. Donald Trump is the devil when it comes to global climate change and environmental policies. We're just going to see the earth heat up dramatically under a Donald Trump administration. That is, of course, what we are hearing from the left. U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders, while Trump and his pals are talking about a glowing future for the fossil fuel industry, the business community knows better. Wind and solar have grown seemingly unstoppable. Did you like how he tapped in, built some credibility there by talking about how the business community knows better? And it's this article he linked to. Wind and solar are crushing fossil fuels. It's this Bloomberg article. And guess what? I agree. Wind and solar and these other renewable sources of energy, the market is liking that. It's becoming more efficient, more effective. But there's this fallacy that Donald Trump and his administration are going to crush these industries and not allow them to move forward. Now, there's no doubt that Trump ran his campaign on jobs. The EPA has killed thousands of jobs by higher taxes and higher fees on different things that they felt was harmful, with more carbon going into the air. And Trump wants to open up offshore drilling. He wants the coal miners and the miners to go back to work. All things that would help make our country more energy efficient. Because if you haven't heard, we're fighting wars in the Middle East that are costing trillions of dollars, largely boiling down to oil and the petrodollar. And of course, we can't even start having the conversation of the U.S. funding ISIS and how it's the Obama administration that destabilized the Middle East and that ISIS has ran wildly, grown violently, and how that has actually benefited the elites in power to keep the oil trade going in the way that is best for them Of course, you can't really have that conversation to the 320 million Americans because we got to dumb down our talk to very surface level discussions. But yeah, we're fighting wars in the Middle East that are costing trillions of dollars. So Donald Trump does want to become more energy independent. And that'll be great for jobs. That'll be great for the country. That'll be great for the country's wealth, which he does want to work on. And that doesn't mean, though, he's going to be anti-clean energy, anti-wind, anti-solar, anti-geothermal, and hydro, and batteries, biofuels. You know, he appointed Governor Rick Perry, who led the infrastructure in Texas for wind power. Texas is by far the largest producer of wind power in the U.S. I don't know what the statistic would be globally, but I know in the U.S. they're by far producing tons of wind power. And guess what? Energy prices in Texas, by the way, are very cheap compared to where I live in California. I spend a great deal of time in Texas, and I know the prices there for energy are very, very affordable. And these people, they're not going to get in the way of the future. And the future is towards renewable energies, towards batteries, and all these different things. They're not going to get in the way of that, but certainly they want to bring jobs back to the country and be less dependent on foreign fossil fuels. And this guy, Bernie Sanders, they politicize these things because it's politically expedient to create the other side as the bad guy and create, a side of loyalty, pander to people, scare people into thinking that you are on their side rather than on the side of the country, which again is a problem on both sides of the aisle. Man, you know what? I'm actually looking forward to the changes that we're going to see. Talking about fossil fuels and, renewable energies and cars being ran on batteries. A lot of us, we hold the thought that, hey, it's where the muscle cars, we're going to lose out on the muscle cars, and we don't want cars that only drive 30 minutes, 30 miles, 60 miles before we need to recharge them. All these things are going to be fixed with technology. Technology is going to revolutionize cars and energy, and it's coming. I'm not against these things. And you know what? We're going to see some breakthroughs where the renewable energies and the batteries and all these different things are going to really be great for our lives. But it's the crony capitalism of government disadvantaging one company and favoring another, which, Trump is against, I'm against. And, if more people were educated on, they would be against too. So that's my rant on Sanders and conservative/liberal agendas and arguments. I look forward to speaking to you guys at a later time, and we'll be releasing some future interviews shortly.